Hi, I'm Jarrett Fuller. Welcome to Scratching the Surface. One of the reasons I started Scratching the Surface back in 2016 was this sense I had that the ways we talked about design felt dated. The platforms for discourse, the methods of communication, and even the topics and the subject matters didn't reflect the contemporary moment. Over the previous decade, the media landscape had shifted radically, and it continues to shift. And for design of any type, to move forward, I think we should always be looking for new ways to talk about the profession and new mediums through which to have these conversations. Florencia Rodriguez, my guest today, has built her work around these ideas. In 2010, she founded the innovative Plot magazine that covered practices in critical thinking in contemporary architecture. And then in 2017, she founded the publishing company Lots of Architecture, through which she publishes the experimental design criticism platform NESS. She's edited books, organized conferences, and brought people together to have important and engaging conversations, often from people working at the edges of architecture and design. Last year, Florencia was appointed the director of the School of Architecture at the University of Illinois at Chicago, a school that also has a long history of engaging in the theory and cultural production of architecture. So I was curious to have Florencia on the show to talk about how her varied background is influencing how she's jumped into this new role. We also talk about the changing state of design criticism and formats for distribution. We talk about the role of publishing in design practice and why operating at the borders, at the margins, on the edges can be valuable in reframing what it is that we do. I have joked before that the thing I love more than writing about design is talking about writing about design. And this conversation is very much that. I left energized and encouraged and optimistic about the future of design publishing. And I hope that you do too. If you like this episode and like what we do here at Scratching the Surface, I hope you consider supporting us on Patreon. Patreon supporters get bonus interviews, full transcripts of every episode, and an exclusive monthly newsletter. Head over to patreon.com/surfacepodcast to sign up and get immediate access and help support the ongoing production of Scratching the Surface. Thank you, as always, for listening, and here is my conversation with Florencia Rodriguez. You finished your first year as the new director of the School of Architecture at the University of Illinois, Chicago. You've almost been in the position almost a year exactly now, right? You have one
Exactly
academic
1 year.
year.
Yes, exactly 1 year this week.
So how did that year go? Can you talk a little bit about sort of stepping into this role and what was interesting to you about taking this position?
Of course, lots of first times this year for sure.
Yeah, I
It's
bet.
been interesting, kind of a roller coaster in a way. Um, but yeah, let's maybe start of why I was interested in this. And um, I'm not sure if you know, but I moved from Argentina in 2021 because
Mm.
it was a great moment to move
Mm-hmm.
from one country to another. The world was very
Yeah.
quiet at that moment.
Yeah.
But well, I've been working back and forth between North and South, South and North for years.
Right.
And I had like amazing conversations with lots of people from different parts, and my work kind of led me to move to the US. And I've been always teaching, writing, publishing. And so I see myself more as a cultural producer in a way,
Mm-hmm.
in many different aspects and formats, and somebody that always pushes and generates the conditions for different dialogues and conversations and with guided
Yeah.
with a very crazy optimism that we can change things by talking about them and trying to research and discover things. So when I learned about the position at UIC, I was really kind of interested in that because I have visited the school in I had visited the school some years ago. I was part of a panel discussion organized by Penelope Dean. I
Mm-hmm.
was kind of when I was in plot publishing different people that were teaching at UIC, like Paul Anderson, Paul Preisner.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
You're naming previous guests of the show. I love it. Penelope and both
yeah,
Pauls have been on the show before.
Oh, really? I've heard
Yeah.
some of them, but I didn't know that the three of them.
Yeah.
Also, maybe had a relationship with Jane Kelly, kind of
Mm.
collaborating in editing a piece, and also I had invited her to publish. So I had an ongoing conversation. Sam Jacob was also published
Oh
in
yeah.
Plot
Yeah.
under my directorship. So a big group of people, and I was very interested in this place in Chicago, with so vibrant and
Uh-huh.
interesting ideas. And I always felt that that was a specific spot that was really interesting for kind of alternative ways to see things,
Mm-hmm.
very open to speculation, to new discourses, to trying to look at things from a different perspective. So I felt really very much related to that. I've always um, felt or seen myself working from the margins in a way, from the
Mm-hmm.
borders of things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, not only in terms of yeah, even geographically, it's Argentina is the southest of the south,
Right. Right.
the thousand country that you can go in the Americas.
Yeah.
Disciplinarily, of course, it's like I decided to work on the margins. I am trained as an architect. I had an office in when I first graduated. I worked for other offices,
Mm.
um, but I always enjoyed this other aspect of trying to understand, of learning, of researching, of talking, of writing, of
Mm-hmm.
organizing conferences, or of trying to, I don't know, maybe act as, yeah, this analytic aspect. I always blame my father. He's a shrink, so I feel I feel that in a way I relate to architecture in that same way. I'm trying to
Yeah.
find pathologies, diagnosis, and interpreting and having, conversations of those things that sometimes are impossible to reach, impossible to fully understand, or impossible to fully put into words. And I think that's amazing. So yeah, that situation of the margins or alternative ways of doing things were something that attract me also, uh, in a different way, but from UIC.
Right.
This
Right.
is this school that gravitated so much, that is, in the words of Bob Sommel, the previous director, kind of a boutique school because of the size, and it
Mm.
has this amazing faculty that are very active in the organization of a discourse, or that particularly I would say 10 years ago, right, that they had
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
moment. And it's kind of interesting to think about a place like this in this new era, because we are going, and this is not news for anybody, right, for we are going through a moment of big changes, and the conversation is changing. So what's the
Mm-hmm.
position that a school such as this one, that is public and is a research university,
Right.
so what's the
Right.
position for us right now? And I thought it was an amazing challenge that I would love at this point of my career and of my life, um, to be able to, yeah, to lead a school, to have uh, these conversations with the faculty, and to think in which way we can uh, make an impact. I know that that kind of phrase is um, like
Right.
very
Yeah. I know what
cliche
you
in a
mean. I know
way,
what you mean. Yeah.
very cliche. But at the end of the day, you really want to support the students that are working with us, and like building their future, and how we can all together think about possible futures. So
Yeah.
yeah, as you see, I'm kind of a very idealistic person,
Yeah, I
and
love that.
yes, I'm very optimistic, and it may sound naive, and I love that. I think that we need some naivete to be able to do things.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you said so much in there that I want to talk about. Actually, but I want to pick up on two things really quickly and get your thoughts on them. Um, I love how you said that you sort of operate on the margins, and I'm always fascinated by when people like that who operate at the margins are then given positions like the position you're in now, where you are then
Yeah.
sort of leading an institution, because that then raises questions about, well, what is the center, what is the margin, how do those things start to
Hmm.
sort of connect with each other. But it's also interesting, you said you think of yourself as a cultural producer, and um, that's why UIC seems so right for somebody at the margins like yourself.
Yeah.
Right on the homepage of the School of Architecture, it says that you promote architecture as a cultural practice of
Hmm.
organizing information, of intelligently identifying and deploying patterns, conceptual, visual, structural, behavioral, and material in the world. And that's such a margin like definition of architecture. Also, could you, I realize that was probably written before
Yes.
sort of took the position, but can you talk about this idea of architecture as a cultural practice and your work as cultural production, and what does that mean to you? What does that actually look like in practice?
Absolutely, because that was kind of super interesting. I had been talking in Argentina about architecture as a cultural practice, and when I read the statement at the USC page, it was like Bob's words and talking
Yeah, I
about that.
figured that. Yeah.
Yes, and I think there's a trajectory there and a genealogy probably in the school of that understanding. But I felt like that, I think, since I was a student, again, because I was thinking of and probably Bob and I would interpret these in different ways, but I think that's the
Mm.
beauty of it.
Hmm. Hmm.
But I was always thinking of the relationship to the context of, and the context also being the ecosystem, being the materials,
Hmm. Hmm.
being the people that were going to, uh, be part of this. I think architecture is always incomplete,
Mm.
and I
Hmm.
think that's interesting.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist if it's not like surrounded by other things, or as part of a bigger system. And I'm not only thinking that architecture is that built thing,
Right.
it's
Right.
also the projects, the ideas, and things that are part of this, disciplinary body that is full of many aspects. And when we talk about architecture today, some people may think about social justice driven projects. Other people will think about new materials and how they will perform in time.
Hmm.
Other people will think about intimacy and interiority, and it's all of that, right? That overlap, this amount of different kind of small social contracts, or small, kind of small and big, very big, right? But I'm trying to
Hmm.
say like small commitments to different things that make architecture such an amazing discipline. So we are world builders in a way, right? Everything, when you're thinking about designing something, you're understanding a way of inhabiting the world and a way of being here right now, or in the future, or in the near future. So uh, I cannot separate like architecture and the design practices from an understanding and reading of our current situation. And again, the world. And that understanding of the situation also needs to understand history, and needs to have a critical thinking and an approach. So that is the sense in which I see architecture as a cultural practice. It's not only about building, it's about making places, it's about making opportunities, and potentiate different things.
I love that also, and I love the way that you You just articulated that. And I think what I also love about that phrase that's on on the homepage is I come from a graphic design background, and you could replace architecture with graphic design there, cultural practice of organizing
Hmm.
information, identifying problems and patterns. And it still works. And I'm very drawn to
Yeah.
these like elastic definitions for design, architecture, graphic design. And I have two questions that may or may not be related. For me, like I'm not really in any position of power. I do the show, I have students, and I can talk about these things,
Hmm.
and can talk about the elasticity of architecture or design, and talk to my students about, design. You could design logos for big corporations, but you could also make zines or films,
Hmm.
or, all of this stuff is design. And you're somebody, to go back to what you were saying, like, you're sort of operating at these margins. Now you're running a school. How do you sort of navigate that blurriness?
Hmm.
And is it different going from your previous roles to now working with faculty and students and administrators? you
Yeah.
know how do you think about that? How do you sort of articulate that mission for a school where you probably have students who really buy into that, and then you also have students who are like, great, but I also just give me the skills so I can get a
Yeah.
job?
I understand what you're saying, but I still feel marginal in a way. And I
Ah.
think that's interesting. I also was in a leadership position in Argentina with Plot, and I
Mm-hmm.
have been like in positions like this for a long time. But the way that I kind of try to look at things, and the way, like you mentioned before, this idea of the margins related to a center, right? And I think
Mm.
I've been talking a lot, and many people have been writing and talking about this centerless or canonless
Mm-hmm.
era and
Mm-hmm.
moment like
Mm-hmm.
that. But what I maybe think, and this is a very personal, how do you feel about yourself, is that that idea of the border, or trying
Mm.
every to take kind of different alternative positions towards things. That
Yeah.
it's about having a critical point of view, and trying to know, not always go with every trend, understand
Right.
what these things are about, what's going on, and why those intellectual trends exist, and what is it about. So in that position, even though I'm directing, leading the school, and surrounded by this group of people that are very collaborative, and participating of amazing conversations towards where we should lead the school for the next years, I still feel that to keep that in the back of your mind, to feel a little in the border or marginal, is really relevant.
Yeah.
And again, you talked about a position of power, and I always say that. And again, it's not kind of fake humbleness, but I feel that it's more like with the, I was going to quote Spider-Man, that is like
Right.
with a
Right. Right.
great
Yeah.
power. I feel it's more about responsibility than power in terms of what
Yeah.
is the school that we want to build. And again, the population of students at UIC is amazing, and I couldn't feel prouder in that sense. We have a very unique and diverse body of students. Many people are there kind of being first generation students, and
Mm.
making a huge effort to get an education, and in that sense, it's like, of course we can discuss everything, but it's, as you were saying, many of them need kind of, I need to get a job, but what are the jobs for the future again?
Right. Right.
And yeah, so to have this open conversation permanently, and to at the same time understand that we need to provide a very clear and concrete set of tools to do stuff, is for sure something that can coexist.
I think that was my question. What you just said at the end is sort of that. I don't have the language for this, because I don't want to use the word balance, but that sort of overlap or intersection between, sort of the critical tools and the practical tools, the
Mhm.
the space for exploration, and also the equipping to get a job, to get the
Yes.
degree, is so interesting to me.
Hmm.
And so, like, and I think when I was sort of talking about, kind of positions of power, what I'm really talking about is a lot of different people who are operating on a lot of different margins. um, where is there space for diverging, and where's there space for coming together, and how do you sort of articulate all of those moving parts?
Everybody's using the terminology of design thinking, about
Mhm,
everything in the
mhm,
world today. And I think that's because what we need right now is imagination. And
mm,
it may sound like simple. Again, let's use that idea of certain naivete to, you know, uh, to tackle some issues, but we need imagination. So I think that UIC might be like the history of UIC has always helped and encouraged imagination to think things,
mhm.
and that is in a way like breaking canons or
Yeah.
preparing for alternative futures. And our students are the ones that maybe what we want to give them is the opportunity to be able to think about things that have not been done yet in terms of,
Mm,
and
yes.
or to at least use things that that we all may recognize as typologies or ways of building, and use them in a way that can adapt
Yeah.
to what the future brings. So I think that that correlation and that kind of coexistence of something that is the specific knowledge or tools plus this permission to go beyond, to break some boundaries, to use them in a more conceptual or imaginative way, um, is very much what we need today.
And that's like very much what you've done also, like in some way. And not to like,
Yeah, probably.
move this back to you, but I'm thinking about, what you mentioned earlier. You were trained as an architect, but have, built a career
Hmm.
writing and editing and publishing. And what strikes me in what you're saying here is like that sort of interest in giving, creating the tools to think things that haven't been thought, this idealism, this optimism, seems like it's been there from the beginning for you.
Yeah.
In the editor's letter to what I think was the first issue of Plot, you say Plot is idealistic. It believes in the necessity and possibility of rekindling arguments. We are motivated to look for meanings, to contribute to the disciplines, and look for alternatives to the pragmatic crisis in which criticism has lately been involved, which is almost, very similar language to what you're talking about at UIC. Can you talk a little bit
Absolutely.
about like where this came from, where this sort of, interest in criticism, this interest in sort of expanding these borders, and the optimism that you have around that?
Yeah, it's funny to confront to that text, and it's nice to see that I am consistent.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
need to understand it's important also to evolve, so I hope I'm also doing that.
I think so.
Yeah, because Plot started like in 2010. That's when I wrote that
Hmm.
editorial letter, and of course, it's talking to a general cultural situation of architecture, but it's also talking about Argentina and Latin America and the context
Mm,
there. Plot started as an alternative project and very much as a, you know, yeah, I was collaborating with the best known publication in Argentina before, that was Suma, that was a
mhm.
huge magazine in Latin America. I think still was the one with the biggest circulation ever to exist in Latin America, thinking about an architectural publication, right? And I was collaborating, and I would take, ideas, and I was participating of the meetings every week. And many of the ideas that I would take they would say, oh no, they are kind of, oh, those projects are not built, or
Uh,
I don't know, this conversation, Latin America is still very conditioned, very this modern heritage that is very omnipresent in so many ways, of understanding reality and understanding architecture for sure. So so I really wanted to promote change, and I couldn't find
uh,
the space in that other publication, and I thought it was important to foster new conversations, to communicate other ways of understanding, uh, yeah, design and architecture, and to think about cities, to think about how we uh, generate new programs for new needs.
Yeah.
So I would say that I started thinking about plot like years before I could found it, thinking that we needed that cultural space. And that's why I think about myself as a cultural producer, because I wanted to inaugurate certain spaces, and plot was thought of, conceived as a platform, not only as a journal. And we did
Uh,
lots of public programming the same month that we launched the first journal. I also inaugurated an exhibition about Latin American design, and so many things. So it was always about the collective, I would say. That's maybe
mhm,
part of my project in a very strong way. It's like collective conversations,
mhm.
and yeah, and the disperse also, right? It's like things evolve in different ways, ideas circulate in different formats, and the
Mhm.
formats are sometimes fixed as a journal or as an exhibition, and sometimes are just conversations in the hall of a school, or
Right.
something
Right.
that keeps on going after one of these more formalized or formal events. So Plot was conceived like that, as a platform to kind of promote certain things, and some of them are very detailed there in that letter, in terms of how to ideologically position ourselves outside of kind of the binary situation of, you know I think
Yeah.
I mentioned first and third world, or low cost versus having, yeah, the excess of resources that sometimes we can see in other parts of the world. But I really wanted to blur all of that and to understand more about the strategies to approach certain issues.
Mhm.
How can we all learn from each other, even though sometimes you cannot replicate a project as it is, and you're not supposed to do that, but you're
Right.
supposed to understand how it performs in terms of yeah, climate conditions, in terms of the idiosyncrasies it's representing, the people that it's represented there, and other things. So that you can always see, even if you are looking at a project that you wouldn't build exactly as it is. Um, so that's what I wanted to encourage,
Yeah.
and and I think it was, in that sense, that's kind of my intellectual project in a way. Plot is kind of the representation of that project, um, and and that goes beyond me. It really,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I completely understand. I mean, the way you sort of describe that is very much how I think about this show. Not to be too meta all of a sudden, but it's the same thing. It is a platform. It is discussion. It is finding new forms to talk about these things. And
Hmm.
what's really interesting to me about plot specifically, but all of your work, but maybe we can start with plot just because that's what we're talking about, is that there were two things happening there. One was you sort of had these ideas, these interests in specific projects, and there wasn't a place to talk about those or to
Hmm.
to discuss those. And so you started this new thing, but you didn't just sort of like make a new thing that already existed, but you were also thinking about the format of how you would discuss them. You were thinking about,
Yes.
well, when is it a journal? When is it an exhibition? When is it something else? Can you sort of talk about that relationship between the format of distribution or the format of production and the ideas themselves, and why playing with those different formats is so interesting to you?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Even Plot was this platform, and mainly a journal. We were doing different panels or encouraging people. Sometimes it would be, a picnic with a band, but the thing was to get people together. And sometimes it would had an agenda of analyzing or what is missing in our conversations with, uh, for instance, like landscape was not a conversation in Argentina some years
Mm,
ago, and we really worked towards that. We were also inviting people from the city to discuss about the latest uh, actions and the things that were needed in the city and put them together, with designers or other people in terms of how do we, I feel that maybe we were, or sometimes I define myself as a convener. How do you put
Mm-hmm.
together in the same table decision makers, designers, intellectuals that can think about words, about
Yeah.
different possibilities in new ways. So, so that's how you sometimes define the formats. Do you need a more immediate conversation? Do we need something that we will build in time, like these ideas? What I was saying, we wanted to talk about landscape. We wanted to also kind of relate to history in a different way. So we would publish historic buildings in the same way that we would do with contemporary ones, instead of the black and white old picture. It's like new pictures, like lively understanding that that is part of our life today as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
we were discussing about different formats. Another thing that I have been working a lot with since that moment is to publish interviews, because also
Yeah.
you're generating, like, yeah, printing things in a moment that ideas circulate very differently, and that we are all getting used to consuming information in a different way. So
Right.
the idea of the dialogue of an interview, of how you approach the different ideas in that different tone, was
Mm-hmm.
something that we have been working in Plot and then in NESS, and even right now in what I do at the school in different formats for the lectures. That's kind of key, like the
Yeah.
conversation in which you are unpacking things, and in which you are kind of explaining things in a fresher way, even though yeah, it's more approachable, it's easier to understand without losing depth. So
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
kind of something that I was obsessed with in a moment. And again, yeah, social media and all of that impacted a lot and changed the narrative in the last decade. So you have to adjust, and I think this is really important right now in terms of in education. How do the students or young professionals kind of relate to the narratives and
Mm-hmm.
discourses, and how do they communicate? And we cannot kind of not pay attention to what's going on in
Totally. Yeah.
in those.
I have a series of questions around around this idea, but I want to keep it kind of focused for a second, because you just mentioned NESS, which was the other publication that you started in 2017, I think.
Hmm. Yes.
2017, and at the same time you started lots of architecture publishers,
Yes.
and 2010 when Plot started, 2017 when you started NESS, that's a pretty big gap in how we receive media and how we receive
Yes.
content. There were a lot of changes there. Can you talk a little bit about lots of architecture and NESS, and how those both sort of continue what you were doing at Plot, and then where those start to do different things, and what those different things were and why you wanted to do those?
Yeah. Yeah, different things happen. Not only kind of
Right,
the
right,
media scenario change,
right,
but
right,
also personally in my life. In the middle of those years, in 2013, I got the Loeb Fellowship at
right.
Harvard at the GSC, and I lived in Cambridge for a year and had amazing conversations. And I was doing Plot, and I was like taking, generating content back
Mm-hmm.
and forth, both for my research during the fellowship and then uh, things for Plot. I made a symposium that year called What Criticism, kind
Mm-hmm.
of asking what are the formats of criticism,
Yeah.
what were at that moment, right? Because it seems like 10 years are a lot right now. Um, and since that moment on, I start my relationship to kind of, yeah, to the US particularly, but to also writing in English and
uh,
being able to communicate with other people started growing very organically. It's not something that I would say I kept on looking for, but it happened. The year after that, I was invited to be, or 2 years after that, I was invited to to be a juror for the MCHAP prize that IIT organizes. So that started to be part of my life. This conversation, north south, permanently, right, going through different places in the Americas, and kind of trying to put people together to discuss different things, to add different points of views in every case.
Mm-hmm.
So so in a moment it felt kind of, as I was saying, organic or very natural to try to start publishing in English. And that's why I kind of conceived NESS with Pablo Gerson. We started that project. Lots of Architecture is the same. Is the publishing company in a
Right.
way. It's an indie publishing company. It was at the beginning it was only the two of us, and then we made an amazing team, and we were able to not only do some journals with a lot of effort because it was only one a year,
Right.
but also to publish some books for the Inter-American Development Bank and for other institutions that were kind of tools for governments. About
Mm-hmm.
we collaborated a lot with Felipe Vera Benitez, and we did books on migration, on housing, on different issues that were very, very concrete, are very, very concrete right now, and there are
Right.
problematics that sometimes are kind of, again, in the boundaries of the architectural discourse, and and that I want to bring in somehow, you know.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think in those years I understood all of that. Some things happen without my, yeah, organically, and of course I was observing how media was changing. So yeah, now I'm working on a book, and I taught a course last year that is called Criticism in the Age of Dispersion, and that is exactly about
Ah.
this, right? And it's how what are the vehicles for idea. And that's why I was saying before, it's like, who are we talking to? How are we talking to? What is the language that we choose to use when we want to discuss something? Are we excluding people? Are we trying
Mm-hmm.
to, make those ideas circulate, to change and to be transformed by others as well? So the intentionality of that and what each different media requires is really interesting to think about. And I see that as a huge, very concrete issue sometimes, not to talk so kind of such a vague way about media, but also about the discussions that we have in architecture today. And I said that when I came to UIC as a candidate, and we had this huge conference last year called "This Is Not Contemporary," in
Right.
which the same issue kind of came, and it was not me bringing that up. But for instance, when you see that kind of polarization right now in terms of thinking about architecture as a formal practice
Mm-hmm.
versus a social driven one, and that makes my mind kind of blow. I get very angry and passionate about that because
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think that's an opposition.
Yeah.
So I feel it's the responsibility of the ones that are in academia, as I am right now, and in media, to be able to articulate things better so we can think of
Yes.
how
Yes.
we exactly how the agency of architecture is also related to a social program without losing the ability to generate beauty, or
Yeah.
or to
Yeah.
talk about form and to talk about other things. And well, I made a huge mess with this, trying to answer your question because I wanted to say too many things. So it's not linear, I know, but I get passionate about that, and I see that the new media, and when you see the discussions in social media right now, and you see the Dan Lloyd Wrights or
Mm-hmm.
other,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
profiles, are kind of denouncing the lack of ability for all of us to pull that together. It's
Yeah.
like.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense to I mean, everything you're saying makes a lot of sense to me, and you're very much speaking my language. These are all the things that I'm, really interested in also. And so I'm not sure if this question is a it might just I might just be asking you to keep talking more about what you were talking about. But some of your what criticism symposium that you did at Harvard
Hmm.
in 2014, some of that is still on YouTube, and I watched a lot of that to prepare for this conversation. And a lot of
Oh.
the This Is Not Contemporary symposium is also
Hmm.
on YouTube, and I watched some of that to prepare for this, and I saw a lot of sort of um, it's interesting to watch those two that are almost 10 years apart.
Yeah.
Um, think watching them in a sort of tight compression like that, and you could see them sort of subtly being in dialogue. And I'm wondering, in the 10 years, almost 10 years since What is Criticism, or what criticism, how has your thinking on criticism, architecture criticism, design criticism, changed in those 10 years? And we've talked a lot
Hmm.
about the sort of the technical aspect of it, the mediums, the formats, social media, and you were hinting at some sort of new ideas on actually like the content, the ideas. Can you talk about both of those? How has your thinking changed, both about sort of
Hmm.
um, how criticism and what criticism, maybe?
Yes. Um, I think there's something that hasn't changed that I think it's relevant towards a
Ah.
critical mind. That is that I'm still confused.
Okay.
I,
Okay.
I, and that's something that I usually talk about. That
Yeah.
I, I don't trust kind of the spaces of comfort, you know? So
Yeah.
I really
Yeah.
believe in discomfort as a
Yeah.
valuable tool for a critical mindset. You know,
Yeah,
it's like,
I mean, Florencia, I started a podcast 8 years ago about design criticism. I'm still doing it, so I'm clearly still confused. Also, I get it.
I'm happy to know that we share that confusion.
Yeah,
But I think that's really important. It's like, and that's why the title of the first symposium you're referring to, what criticism is, what is it? It's like criticism is an impossible mission, and we talked about the same in This Is Not Contemporary. So you are right in kind of reading that continuation or that kind of second iteration or different in
mm-hmm.
a different format of some same questions or at least similar questions. Yeah, because it's kind of in a way that reflects my personal research. And it's like questioning what's the form. Are we still only going to generate like papers that are read
Right,
by a small group of people, and in which way those affect the discipline? And
right,
I and again, I'm not against those. I very much encourage that. I love them, and I think that's really relevant. They need to keep on existing, but that's not. And again, I'm kind of repeating myself, but that's not the way in which ideas circulate more broadly.
right,
And
right.
again, and I really believe in making things public, and it's not for the sake of showing off or to generate this fake idea of a social media celebrity thing, but but to expand the conversation, and that's the way that things evolve and transform and can really make an impact. So that's why I believe in making things public and in communication, and that was very present in both of those events. Um, Still, I think that this is kind of an impossible mission, the idea of criticism, in terms that you will never reach with words the things that you want to kind of understand,
Mm-hmm,
but that
mm-hmm.
the cultural construction of that ongoing conversation of different articles or different or something that continues in a lecture, in a seminar, or that ends up in a decade transforming the curricula, because things are kind of don't evolve from one day to another, but
Mm.
are slowly and in different ways going to a different direction. That is impacting the curricula for sure of our architecture school. What is it that we are doing, and how do we think an architect should be in the future? I was joking the other day saying, well, maybe in a couple of years, structure. It's not going to be taught anymore because the AI machines are going to
Right,
calculate everything.
right.
But still, we need to understand conceptually how that works,
Uh huh.
how the
Yeah.
forces work. So I think. criticism might talk about one building in one place, or may talk about a tendency, or may talk about, uh, as I don't know, last Venice Biennale, how a continent, how impact and change the discourse generally. It can have different scales, but at the end of the day, the thing is to expand the conversation. So, what are the forms and what is it that we should be discussing today? What are the themes that are relevant to our present and that require for us to be discussing? And some are not needed, and we just do it for the sake of the discipline or because of the sake of personal obsessions. And those are,
Mm.
of course, our value, but we cannot let the others, disappear.
In many ways, I feel like we're in this sort of like renaissance of architecture and design publishing. Like there's so much
Mhm.
content and there's so many, little journals starting up, or like you mentioned,
Mhm.
Dank Lloyd Wright, or, kind of new magazines or new websites and podcasts and, YouTube series, all of this stuff. Um, and I'm wondering sort of what you make of all of all of this, how
Yes.
you mentioned being confused, but like how do you sort of make sense of, or like map all of these conversations happening?
Hmm.
Can you just sort of talk about that? I mean, I guess you mentioned earlier that you teach a class called Criticism in the Age of Dispersion, which maybe speaks to this a little bit too, but
Hmm.
how do you
Exactly.
sort
Yeah.
of articulate and make sense of all of this?
Yeah, I think that has to do with what we said before about the centerless era. So
Mm-hmm.
that kind of proliferation of small media outcomes, small in terms of maybe
Right.
the yeah, the budget, the investment, or the amount of the circulation that one journal would have, but not small in terms of the power to get to different people. Because when you
Right.
talk about social media or YouTube or or a podcast, it's like probably the audience for those is like already a lot more than the amount of people that can read an article that
Mm-hmm.
is only
Yeah.
printed on paper.
Right.
So
Right.
it's interesting to see how that proliferation or the availability of different channels of information everywhere at every moment uh, kind of coexist. So, um, and I would say that I realized that some people that are still working with the more, I would say, traditional ways of how ideas circulate kind of get very nervous about all of this and distrust uh, these other forms that are more dispersed. But
Mm.
here I would say that I come also from um, an alternative music tradition in terms of
Oh,
the
nice.
underground and the
Yeah, yeah.
grunge or punk movements. And I
Yep, yep.
really believe in that dispersion and how the smaller or weak thinkers, if we I'm not sure if you translate the weak thinkers in the as this in English, I'm sorry if not in philosophy, but the coexistence of people that are beyond the canon or that are working in different ways really generate a critical mass that transforms things and generate kind of the cultural ecosystem for things to move.
Hmm.
And it's not top down, it's not this canonic voice directing
Yep,
or
yep.
determining where a discipline should go or where are the things that we should be teaching and discussing, but it's more dispersed and it's still it's amazingly kind of present,
Yeah.
and relevant. So I really think we need to take part on those things. I don't use um, social media in that sense, just because I think that I don't have the generational ability, maybe,
Yeah, yeah,
to
yeah.
use Twitter or even
Yeah.
Instagram to generate content. But I admire that the way that and
Yeah.
well, I think you also. I'm not sure if you interviewed also Stuart Hicks, who is part of
Oh,
our
no, I haven't.
faculty. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Stuart he has this YouTube channel that is amazing, and I was looking
Oh,
at some
interesting.
of it, and I saw that one of the videos had like uh, 5 million views, and please tell me where you can find 5 million people reading one article in the last year. So, um, yeah, of course, if we talk about like historical texts of architecture, yes, we will find that amount of people. But there are 5 million people that could talk together in a room about this video,
Right, right.
and that is a very interesting way of understanding the potential cultural impact that new media can have. And well, I'm not getting into a political discussion here, but for sure, if you see how it's being used by different polarized
Hmm.
discourses, right?
Yep.
And that, well, and we are from academia discussing whether those ways of idea circulation are relevant or not. Of course they are. So we need to understand that, and we need to to learn from that.
You mentioned that you're writing a book about criticism. Can you talk more about that and sort of the ideas in that project?
Yes. The book is called Why Bother? Criticism.
I love it.
Why Bother? Critical editorial manifesto in the age of dispersion. And
Uh,
it has different pieces. It compiles part of my work because again I'm not sure where you read the plots editorial letter in English, but but it's those things are maybe not available. So
uh,
it's a combination of new things and the translation of some of the editorial letters or pieces that I want to put together. Because I
mm,
also feel that when you work, when you use articles as pieces that evolve and have kind of a presence in time, and it's not one big piece that you put together on the same year, it's harder to for others to understand the general research behind that.
yeah, yeah.
So I'm putting together some of the articles that are about criticism and discourse in general, as we are discussing today, and others that are related to Latin America contemporary
Mm,
architecture. So those are kind of the two lines of my research in the last, I would say, 20 years. So I'm putting some of these things together. I'm reflecting about new media because, of course, as you were mentioning, in this last decade, so much has happened, and something from 10 years ago may seem older sometimes, and it's very important to try to, you know, again, get back to that discomfort
hmm.
when you and try to challenge some of the things that maybe we were doing 10 years ago, and to understand where valuable today, or or which of them need to change or to find other
Right,
paths.
right. And when's the book? Do you have like a release date or anything? A
Oh, I don't
publication
know.
date?
No, I'm working.
Okay.
To be honest, it was 80% done when I took the position, and
Oh,
this
I
year
see.
I had to put it on hold. I'm
I
now in
understand.
conversations to resume that, and I hope during the next year I can print it. But
Great.
but I will let you know. Yes.
Great. Yeah, we'll talk more when the book is out. I have two more sort of hopefully kind of quick questions that I think will sort of wrap up and uh kind of tie together all these threads that we're
Hmm.
talking about. I'm really curious as you head into your second year as director, how you see these ideas that we've been talking about for the last hour sort of
Hmm.
embedding themselves into the program. What do you see for the future of the School of Architecture, and sort of how these questions of criticism and media and formats and expanded boundaries of architecture, how do you see that playing out, or what are sort of your goals or
Hmm.
hopes for the program?
Yes. I think that's a very interesting question, and something that for sure has been the center of my attention and my um, thinking during the last year. I took the first year also to observe and to understand
Mm-hmm.
uh, lots of things about the school, and this year is the first year that I am kind of bringing that kind of a new project and a new vision to fruition.
Mm.
Last year, of course, we started with a very strong public program and the conference you were mentioning, but now it's going to start affecting the courses. And yeah, I do have a very clear agenda. You mentioned one of those things, like the expanded values and everything, but the concrete things would be that we need to incorporate, yeah, thinking about, and I'm not going to say anything very original, but it's like, how do we incorporate like the climate change situation to
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
curricula? How do you think about extreme situations? How do we think, as I mentioned before, about possible futures that are here around the corner, right? We cannot keep
Yeah.
on doing the same stuff. How do we use imagination for that, for sure? How do we engage in social justice driven practices that are part of the architectural discourse and that are not kind of, leaving that
Yep.
behind.
Yeah. Yeah.
I ended the year like with a very small talk when we were in the party, the year-end show,
Mm.
and I mentioned a discussion about formalism against being able to care about other stuff. And
Uh,
I said, and I still think that that's kind of the superpower of architecture,
mm-hmm.
that we can put all of those things together for sure, and
Yeah.
still try to think in form, to talk about form. And again, it's not a coincidence that I'm trying to go back to beauty so many times, because beauty
Yeah.
has
Yeah.
different meanings, no, depending on the moment. And I think it's important to bring that up again. But yeah, I think the school needs to relate more to the social scenario, political scenario right now, and also to our changing world and environment. So I hope we can put together the fantastic genealogy in terms of form making that the school brings to the table and that is already there, and to be able to discuss about these urgent contemporary issues here.
Yeah. I mean, I think though, like you said, those are the questions that every design program
Hmm.
is facing today. And it's so easy to
Exactly.
to give that list and to just be cynical and and
Yes.
depressed. And so I think like your optimism is very very encouraging for me to hear you sort of talk about these and to start to kind of think about what those futures could look like. And so my last question, this is the question I used to end all of these conversations. I'm curious what you're reading right now.
Oh, what I'm reading. I'm trying. This is a very interesting moment for me because, again, I'm writing more and more in English, and I'm trying
uh,
to find my voice in English. With in Spanish, my tone is very clear, and
ah,
and when I try to write in English, I'm still looking for it. And I just finished a book from Joan Didion, The Year of Magical Thinking, which is kind
mm-hmm,
of
mm-hmm. Yep.
a very sad book, I would say. But,
Yeah.
but at the same time, I loved so much the tone that I'd probably be reading much more of her
Oh,
in the near
nice.
future. And yeah, I'm trying to go back to reading literature instead of architecture. So that's kind of my my goal for the year.
Yeah, I love it. Those are the best answers when it's like a bunch of novels and things like
Yes,
that's what
I'm
I want to
trying to
hear.
do that. Yes, and yeah, exactly. And I was trying to read science fiction because I love the idea of world building in science fiction. But I found that I just learned that from myself. I'm not good at that.
I feel the same way. We should talk about that some other time. I've tried science fiction too, and I really struggle.
Yes,
I
I
struggle with
really
that. I don't know
want
why.
to like it, but I cannot read science
Me
fiction. I
too.
don't know.
Me too.
Yes, yeah.
Well, if there's anybody to sort of model a voiceover, I think Joan Didion is definitely a worthy model. Florencia, this was
Yeah.
such a nice conversation. Like I just said, your optimism is contagious, and I really enjoyed this.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
being on the show.
No, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it. Thank you, John.
And that was my conversation with the editor, writer, and educator Florencia Rodriguez. This conversation was recorded on August 3rd, 2023. Our new theme music is by former guest and friend of the show, Jeremiah Chu. The show is made possible because of Patreon supporters, so if you like what we're doing here, I hope you consider supporting us on Patreon and get some bonus content each month. You can follow us across social media at Surface Podcast, and you can listen to all of our previous episodes wherever you get your podcasts and at our website, scratchingthesurface.fm. Thanks for listening.